The Epistle to the Hebrews, Part 23, Christ's Qualifications as High Priest. Introduction. 1. As recurring theme in this epistle is that Jesus, as our high priest, he has been described as a merciful and faithful high priest, Hebrews 2:17, B, the high priest of our confession, Hebrews 3:1, C, a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Hebrews 4:14, D, a priest who can sympathize with our weakness, Hebrews 4:15. 2. In this keeping with the overall purpose of the epistle, A, which is to show the superiority of Jesus and his new covenant, B, we have considered Jesus' superiority to 1. Prophets, Hebrews 1:1-3, 2. Angels, Hebrews 1:4 through 2:18, 3. Moses, Hebrews 3:1-6. It is only natural that the comparison to Aaron and his priesthood be made. 3. The actual comparison with Aaron will follow later, but first there is the need to A. Review the qualities required in high priests, B. Establish that Jesus does indeed qualify as a high priest, which we find in our text for our study today, Hebrews 5:1-10. For non-Jewish readers who may be unfamiliar with the role of high priest, this section of Scripture can be enlightening and increase our appreciation of Jesus as our high priest. 1. The qualities required of a high priest. A. Divine appointment. 1. The work of a high priest involves things pertaining to God, Hebrews 2:17. 2. He must offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins, Hebrews 8:3. Thus, only God can rightfully select a high priest, even as God called Aaron, Exodus 28:29, Leviticus 8:9, and Numbers 16:18. B. Human sympathy. 1. A high priest is selected from among the men. 2. This helps to ensure the spirit of compassion, A. Towards those who are ignorant and going astray. 1. Note that the high priest was to make a distinction between sins of ignorance and sins of presumption, rebellion, Numbers 15:22-31. 2. Sacrifices were to be offered in behalf of the former, but not the latter. B. For he himself is often beset by weakness. 1. A high priest who knew his own weakness would be more likely to be understanding of his brethren. 2. It also explains why the high priest in the Old Testament offered sacrifices for his own sins as well as for the sins of the people, Leviticus 16:11. Thus, a high priest would need to be well acquainted with the human condition, or the struggle against temptation. The parallel between high priests in the Old Testament, Jesus as our high priest, does not hold true to every minute detail, Hebrews 7:26-27. But certainly in the most fundamental ways, Jesus has the qualities to be our high priest. 2. Christ's qualifications as high priest. A. He's divinely appointed. 1. Christ was divinely called to serve as high priest, just as Aaron was. 2. As evidence of his calling, 2 messianic prophecies are offered. A. His position as God's Son, Psalms 2:7. B. His appointment as a priest after the order of Melchizedek, Psalms 110:4. As God's Son, sitting and ruling at the right hand of God, Psalms 110:1-3, his calling as high priest is only natural. B. Sympathetic because of his own sufferings. 1. While in the days of his flesh, Christ, A. offered prayers and supplications with vehement cries and tears. B. He prayed to him who was able to save him from death. C. He was heard because of his godly fear. 2. That Jesus would have godly fear and offer such prayers provides insight to the extent of his temptations and sufferings in the flesh. Also see Hebrews 2:18 and 4:15. 3. Even though he was God's son, by the things which he suffered, he learned obedience. What does this mean? A. Certainly he knew obedience as the Son of God. B. Perhaps it means he came to know what obedience involved as one in the flesh, with the challenge of obedience in the midst of suffering and temptations, etc. Through his sufferings, Jesus certainly understands the human condition, which qualifies him to serve as high priest. Qualified by virtue of his calling and his compassion to be high priest, what kind of high priest is Jesus? Here ends our study of Part 23, the Epistle to the Hebrews, Jesus' qualifications as high priest.